All right, thanks everybody for showing up. This is Teams Architecture for Teams Owners. I named it that way because a lot of times when you say stuff about cloud architecture and the back end of Microsoft 365, it might scare some people away when this is really for people who use Teams. You don't need to be even an owner so much, just a lot of things that are happening inside Teams, with Teams, about Teams. You don't know where those files end up or where you need to go to get the stuff back after you've had a meeting, after you've shared files in chat or whatever. So that's kind of what the focus of this presentation is going to be. So, and about me, I work a lot of SharePoint on-prem for my job with the Department of Defense here in Washington, D.C., but I also do a lot of stuff with the user group for DC, and you can find us on meetup.com there. So I also help lead some of the communities of practice at my agency. But if you need to reach out to me, I'm still on Twitter and I'm also on LinkedIn. So do want to give a shout out to Synology. These kind of events wouldn't happen if it weren't for the sponsors, and they provide a lot of good products and good services, so check them out. So getting into it. So obviously, if you're in this track, as we were talking about before, Teams has really taken over a lot of the market share inside for telework, for working from home, for just even being in an office. And it's sort of evolved over the last couple of decades for Microsoft as they tried to put everything together in one place. They're combining with this, now they're calling it, it was unified communications when they were combining Outlook and SharePoint and workspaces and files. Now it's intelligent communications now that they've got Skype and calling and chat and all the rest. So it's something that Microsoft's been working towards for a while, and going forward in Microsoft 365, everything's sort of going to be able to connect to Teams, or at least be reflected in Teams. Even all the topics for Viva today, they're going to be talking about how Viva can interact with Teams. So still a big product and still a big focus for Microsoft 365. So just talking about where some of the places where you might actually get your work done, a lot of these products in Microsoft 365 are focused around whether it's across the organization, like Teams or SharePoint, the people you work with on a daily basis, like your work center, and then the stuff that's just for you, Outlook, OneDrive, that sort of thing. So just to sort of how those things are focused together inside the application storm that is Microsoft 365. And then just the standard, this is looking at cloud and cloud applications. So it is, servers are someone else's computer. Cloud applications with virtual machines and the connections and the AI running things behind the scenes, it's more than just that offhand quote that people like to do. And Microsoft 365 is the far right. Microsoft runs everything, and they connect everything together for you so that as a user, as an admin, you can pretty much get to everything you need, and they'll help you out with it. So just to talk about the programming of Teams for a second, right? It is a web-based application in that it's based in the cloud, uses all the services that Microsoft 365 can pump into it. And this is how they coded it. So at the very bottom for the regular desktop Teams, you've got some programming languages, some JavaScript in there, and then the HTML, CSS layers on top when you're talking about the web version, right? For desktop, Windows or Mac, they can either program it in C++ or Objective-C, depending on the OS. And an Electron is just a layer that makes it work on your actual computer, right? So why do we care about all of this? Well, that's because if you've ever noticed the difference between using the Teams client application, whether you're on Mac or Windows, and the web version, this is why. They can put more features into those code layers between the HTML version and your desktop version. So that's why it's different, and that's why you'll get different features depending on which app, how you're getting into Teams, right? And then on the mobile side, whether you're using your phone or a tablet, it's going to be completely different as well because there's completely different code bases underneath. And whether it's an iOS or Android, you're going to get different features on both. And this is why they can do certain things in iOS or Android that they can't do on the desktop settings because it's just a different code base from the start, such as the walkie-talkie features for Android for Teams. So just to sort of, this is what's happening underneath Teams, and this is why it's going to be different each version that you use. Now we'll talk a little bit about the logical architecture, right, of Teams and how they've sort of think about it when they set it up. So it's always going to be based on what you are doing in Teams. And if it's chat and it's one-on-one with you, then those things are probably going to be found in OneDrive because that's your storage. If it's for the team side of things, whether you're in a channel, you're sharing files in a channel, you're having a meeting in a channel over there, that's going to be based in SharePoint, and the SharePoint that's part of the Microsoft 365 group that makes your team work. So, and then there are other things that are brought in through the connection with Exchange and Active Directory. And things like your activity feed, what reply you've replied to or someone else has replied to you, your contacts, the chats you pin, right? They're all stored in Exchange, including any images or GIFs or stickers that you share. Those are actually stored in Exchange, but not as the actual images. That would be way too big. They're just stored as links. So they are kept, but they're not in a place where a normal user is going to be able to reach back and see what's going on there. But as far as OneDrive and SharePoint go, that's what you're looking at. And just a lot of stuff to point out. I came to Microsoft 365 out of SharePoint, and with the recent stream basing in SharePoint, there's a lot of SharePoint underneath a lot of Microsoft 365. So if you can understand SharePoint, you can get a lot of Microsoft 365. So now we'll get into probably the deepest part of the architecture here, and this is all the things that all the cloud services and the intelligent communications setup in the cloud that are going to interact with Teams, right? So however you get into Teams, whether it's through the web, whether it's through your desktop client, your phone, tablet, or through the backend Graph API that connects all of these cloud services together and that you can access with Power Automate or Power Apps or other things, right? Those are going to come in to the cloud and get split up by that team services modules, right? For instance, if you're, right, when you add a file to a chat in Teams on your desktop, it's going to split things up so that the chat goes through the connectors, ends up in Exchange. The files are going to get shoved over to SharePoint for a team chat, for a team post in a channel. For a chat, those files are going to go over to OneDrive and Forms and other workspaces and all the rest. This MRU stands for most recently used, and this is the service in Teams that is handling the activity feed. So when you see Teams, what you've last read or what you've last replied to, that's where it's keeping track, right? And then, of course, other things are being pushed out to all of these other services in the cloud. Teams wouldn't work if it didn't have all these cloud services. So it is 100% a cloud-based application. Just a point like this calling and stream connection, right? That's done through something that Microsoft calls the media mixer. So, and that is important for owner types, user types, because it'll help you just doing your, if you understand that little bit of connection, then, right, everybody's, you ever used a Teams meeting or a Teams call, there might be somebody who comes in and they're a bit distorted, they're scratchy, their camera doesn't work, everything like that. That's because when everyone is on a call, your individual video and audio stream goes up to the cloud. Everyone's calls, everyone's audio and video are put together in that media mixer and then returned to you in the downstream as a single stream. It's not, if there's 12 people in the call, it's not 12 downstreams. It's a single mixed downstream instantly put together. Now, so if someone comes in and their voice or their video is distorted, it's not a bandwidth problem with the cloud, probably. It's not Microsoft's issue. It's probably a bandwidth issue on their end. And if they turn off their video, then that audio stream going up has more room to go up. So it doesn't affect the downstream, but that's only a single stream. So it's not like everybody turn off your cameras and it'll get better. It'll still be the same size. So just if they, for troubleshooting, if somebody's having a problem, have them turn off their video if they've got it on, or stop watching the share, right? Because that audio stream is been fine-tuned down to 4 kilohertz, which is like less than AM radio, which is already less than the sound of a human voice, the range of a human voice. And yet, when it gets unpacked at the far end, it still sounds natural and normal. So that's a pretty good engineering accomplishment, in my opinion. But that's just how understanding this architecture can help you in your day-to-day life. Right? So now let's talk about like where everything ends up. Right? Like I said, if it's on that chat side, that one-to-one or that group chat side, then it's going to be in OneDrive, right? Where you have all the conversations are going to be stored in Exchange. All the images are in the media services part of Exchange, but the files that people share are in the sharer's OneDrive, and they're automatically shared with, permission-wise, everyone in that chat at that time. So in a special folder that gets created the first time you share a chat file, the Microsoft Teams chat files in the OneDrive of the person who shared it. So to show off what that looks like, I've got, here's me in Teams, and in my chat with Megan, she and I she shared some app process flow. I shared back a different file. She shared an Excel file, right? I shared a Word file to talk about it first, okay? On her end, she sees, go away. Okay. I don't know why it's, okay, right? She sees the same thing, just reversed. But as to where those files actually are, so I shared the Word file and everything. If I go to my OneDrive, and there's a folder that was automatically created called Microsoft Teams chat files. When I look inside there, I see the app process and app requirements, which are the ones I shared with Megan, but I don't see the ones she shared with me. She sees them because if we look in, right, if we look in the details, it's been shared, right? So it says, I shared this file with myself and her. So if I go into the manage access part, I can see that I actually, and then advanced, right? I can see that this file has actually been shared with Megan. I didn't have to go into OneDrive and not activate it. It was automatically done because I shared it with her in chat. On the opposite side, she sees her files that she shared in chat, and they're automatically shared with me. And I can even get to the conversation that it happened on. Just going to try to open up this Teams client, but anyway, right? So as I was saying, if it's in chat, it's in OneDrive in that chat files folder. Now, if it's a conversation that goes on in a team that somebody posted a file in there, then it's in SharePoint, specifically the documents library that's on the SharePoint that runs the files tabs for all the channels, right? And if you have a calendar, group calendar for your team, then that's also stored in Exchange. So to see what that looks like, right? If I've got, let me go back to Teams, and we've been sharing files in the general, these sample files, and you can see that they're in the Files tab. Well, they would be in the Files tab if it was loading. Right, here we go. Sample. Those are the ones that I shared in the channel. And if I open this in SharePoint, it'll take me to the Teams site, documents library that's behind this team in the Microsoft 365 group. In the general folder, which gets created when the general channel gets created, here's where those files are. So now, why is that really important? If Megan leaves the company, if Megan leaves and her OneDrive gets turned off or archived, I won't have access to those files she shared with me in chat anymore. They're gone or they're locked away. And I'd have to get the Exchange permissions to get it unlocked to get those files back. But if someone shares it to the group, to the team, and they leave, those files, that information is part of the team as long as that team is active. So just something to keep in mind. If you're in a group chat with somebody or a bunch of people, and one of them has been sharing files and they drop the chat, they leave the chat, those files, or they leave the company and their account gets deactivated, then those files are gone, right? If you're in an ongoing group chat that someone gets added to, they don't have access to the previous files. You have to go in and manually share those files from the previous chats to those people, because that sharing permission only happens at the moment it's shared. So if you're having an ongoing project, you're better off having a new team for it, because all that stuff will be permanent as long as that team's active, right? So chat, OneDrive, team, SharePoint. Now, meetings. Oof. All right. There's a lot more going on in the meetings. People are sharing files in the meetings. People are doing recordings. They're having all sorts of wiki notes maybe going on, and those are on all different places. But again, if it's a standalone meeting, meaning it's you and 2 other people that you've invited, say, or 5 other people, or it's just a singular event, then any files that get added are in that person's OneDrive, just like other chat files in that same chat files folder. If someone takes notes in meeting notes, when the meeting with a wiki tab that gets created, then those meeting notes are in an MHTML file in the person who started the section of the wiki in their OneDrive, a Microsoft Teams data folder, and in a folder inside that called wiki. If someone clicks the red recording button, that recording file that is stored in their OneDrive. If someone else, if they stop recording and then someone else clicks the recording button, that is stored in their OneDrive. So things end up all over the place. So to see what that looks like, we see another meeting that we had, this systems review meeting with Lee and Patty and me, right? And Lee went ahead and started taking notes in the wiki tab that was created. There were some files shared and somebody hit the recording button. And it was all, right? If we look at the chat, we can see that some files were posted to it, some files were shared. This attendance, right? I shared some files. Lee shared some files. Okay. Lee was the one that hit the recording button. All right. So if I go into Lee's OneDrive, I can see a chat files, a data, and recordings. If I look inside that systems review meeting, that's where the recording is, because he clicked the recording button and it's automatically shared with me because I was in the meeting. If we go back up, he started taking wiki notes. So if I look in his Microsoft Teams data, I see wiki folder, and eventually there'll be some files in here. But it's just not cooperating today. Here we go. Systems review, here's another meeting he had where he took wiki notes, right? The person who clicked the section, that's where they're stored. And they are MHT files, which I'm just going to point out, we try to open it and I just want to get the stuff out of there. It's going to try to open it in email because there is no MHTML. And it's actually going to try to give me a warning that this is an issue. Right. And then because he's the one who clicked the red recording button for our meeting, that's where that recording file is stored. So, and he's the one who could control the expiration date. So meeting recordings are set to automatically expire, but the person who controls it, person who clicked the button, can change the expiration date. But they have to do it because they're the one who hit the red button. Okay, so again, if you have a meeting and then later on you want to keep those files, you should probably move them out of these places and into the Teams or into Share Drive or something like that, because if that person leaves, they're gone. Now, if you have a meeting in a channel, like if you schedule a meeting and you hold it in the channel, then everyone in the team has access to those files, to those meeting notes, to the recordings, because they're going to be in SharePoint. So again, conversations go to Exchange, the images go to the media services. Any files shared during the meeting are automatically stored in the documents library in that channel folder. Anybody who clicks the meeting notes section, those files are going to be stored in a completely different library called Teams Wikidata that is created the first time somebody in the team starts taking wiki notes. The recording is going to be stored in SharePoint in the channels folder in a recordings folder. Again, created the instant somebody hits that red button for a channel meeting, right? So on the OneDrive side, they put it in Teams data and then a wiki folder. On the channel side, they decided to make it an entirely new library for whatever reason. Again, to see what that looks like, right. Lee has a channel meeting where they've taken notes that show up now here. He likes to take the meeting notes in the wiki. So, and he's made recordings and added files to the meetings. Those are stored in SharePoint. We go to the production team site behind the production team, go to that documents library. We can see that in the general folder for the general channel, that's where the recording is stored. Recordings are stored. As more and more meetings go on and more recordings are done. Loading is just not cooperating today. Here we go. Right, so that's where meeting recordings for a channel meeting show up. All the files that are shared in the channel meeting, again, are in that channels folder in documents. But any meeting notes, you have to go to this site and find Teams Wikidata library. They created a general folder because general channel, and there they are. There are the wiki notes. Whoever clicked the button is where is the created bys. And then other people add notes. But those are, again, because it's in the team, it's always available should someone leave. Right? So one-on-one stuff, OneDrive. Other, team stuff, SharePoint. Again, just to point out about wikis, they are in a .mht file. If you want to get the information out of them later, it's kind of hard to do because it's not in a format that is readily available. It used to be that it wasn't even searchable. If you went up to search this site and tried to find that information, hey, I know we took meeting notes on this at some point. Did somebody mention it? you wouldn't even be able to find it. Now it does. However, it's hard to open in a format that you can copy it out of, right? It tries to open an MHT file. Teams tries to open an MHT file. Microsoft 365, sorry, tries to open a .mht, MHTML file in email. Yikes. So just keep in mind that wikis are difficult. Now, very recently, last month, I think, Microsoft went ahead and changed the defaults for Teams. Now you no longer get a wiki tab created by default, which is great because I like using OneNote, and OneNote is integrated with Outlook, has been since it came out. It does great meeting notes. Why they decided to go with a wiki, I'll never understand. But just something to point out about wiki notes. Now, private channels and shared channels, the new kid on the block, which is, I believe, the topic for the next meeting in this track. What happens when someone creates a private channel in your team? So, want to see what that looks like. If I go to Teams, there is a private channel, right? And this is just for certain people in the team. But in order to make this work, SharePoint has to create a separate SharePoint site, different from the SharePoint site that's part of the Teams Microsoft 365 group, in a completely different place, especially even in the SharePoint admin center. It can only be seen and managed by the team owners, by any of the private channel members, and anyone who's in the SharePoint admin role for your Microsoft 365 admin center, right? Now, you can have retention policies for one set, regular SharePoint sites, and retention policies for your private channels or your shared channels, but those are in different places in the admin center, and they are in different, you have to apply them separately. So it's hard to manage from the admin side. It seems like a great idea, but just understand that any of the files that are going to get posted here don't end up in the regular SharePoint site that is the team. If we go and try to open this in SharePoint, and there's no connection between this SharePoint site for these people and if I just go back to SharePoint and go to IA leadership, or sorry, the top level team that it's part of, right? It's in Sites, Intrepid Astro, whatever, and where is it? This one. This one's in an odd place, but it is an entirely different site collection. And there's no connection between them. So if you have a retention policy that doesn't allow you to delete entire site collections, which is probably a good idea, then the people who created the private channel will not be able to delete that channel because that channel has a separate site collection. And if their admins haven't set up the policies to allow for that, you can end up having people create private channels, but then not be able to delete them. So just keep that in mind. Shared channels are a little different, but again, they are also created in a separate category, channel sites now in the admin center in the cloud. So, and all of these policies and all of these limits and all of the things that are set up in the SharePoint admin center, the size, any retention policies, deletion policies, information management policies that are set up in the SharePoint admin center or OneDrive admin centers, they're the same thing. That's going to affect how your teams work. Because if you have a small, say 10 gigabyte OneDrive policy set size limit, then once you've shared 10 gigabytes worth of files, it's full, right? And on the other side, if your SharePoint site limit is set to less than 1 terabyte, say 10 gigabytes, like my agency seems to think they need to do, then as soon as people shared enough files in Teams, because the SharePoint size limit is so small, that'll start affecting how people can share files in Teams. So it's all connected under the hood, right? So, and then just a little point out about shared channels. They are new this year. So if you need, they were designed to address working in one tenant when you have guests and all the rest of that come in. And the next topic in this track is talking all about that. So if you are interested in shared channels, I recommend that topic. And then just to point out how all of those workspaces that were in the previous architecture slide work together, and Stream is coming into. More and more things are being stored in SharePoint and openly. Microsoft Forms added the ability to upload files as part of the questions. Now, if it is a form that you create and you didn't share it with anybody, you didn't share it with the group, then because it's you and yours, it's going to be in your OneDrive. So any files added to a question you made on a form that has a file upload question are going to be in your OneDrive, in an apps folder that gets created, in a Microsoft Forms folder that also gets created, along with the form name and the question number. If you rearrange the questions, if you have 2 file upload questions and you rearrange the order, it doesn't make any difference. It's going to say question 1 and question 2, and that 1 and 2 are the order you uploaded them in. If you make it a group form and attach and assign it to a group, then it's SharePoint. So it's going to be in the SharePoint site documents library in apps folder, Microsoft Forms, form name, questions, right? And when a file gets uploaded, it's always going to append the suffix for username. So when you do that in Forms, it does tell you that you can't make this form anonymous because it's going to record their name as part of the file. So, and just to see what that looks like. So I created a form. This is where they can report an issue and upload. Right, I had a file upload question. So I set the limit to 5. Single files can't be any bigger than 10 megabytes, say. And I made it a group form. So if I go back to Forms and I see all my forms, I can see that, yes, it's a, oops, no, maybe not this one. Anyway, my groups. We can see that it's a group form for the IT group. If I go to the IT group documents library, I can see apps. I can see the forms folder. I can then see the report and issue folder that was created for the form name. This is the start of the question. And these are any of the files that have been uploaded by people. as answers to that question. So that's where they'll end up. If you make it a personal form, it's in the same structure, just in your OneDrive. So there's all of that, which is fine. But that is where file uploads to forms end up. And I did it as part of Teams because if it's part of your group form, it's going to end up in your SharePoint documents library, same as everything else that's associated with your team and the Microsoft 365 group. Like I said at the beginning, Microsoft is putting a lot of things together inside Teams and the SharePoint site that helps that team work. So just to sort of wrap it up, you're not going to have a standalone Teams. There's no way to have Teams work without the internet, full connection, full bandwidth, and everything like that, because it's using a lot of services put together in the cloud. And so you need to be connected to the cloud at all times for that, right? Any of the Microsoft 365 governance that the admin set up is going to affect how your Teams operates, because a lot of it is based on those OneDrive and SharePoint policies and limits. So keep that in mind. Throughout the cloud, Microsoft doesn't do backup. There's too many things going on for them, and there are a lot of third-party backup tools. So if you need backup for Teams, you need to go third-party. It's just there. It's always going on. And Azure is the AI that's keeping track of all these things and juggling all of these things. And Azure can keep track of at least up to 60 trillion objects and counting. Now, according to Microsoft, no one's even come close to the previous limit, 30 trillion, but they are preparing for whatever they can. So juggling 60 trillion objects per tenant is what Azure is capable of doing. So just like Teams is really cool. Teams is amazing. Teams can really help you bring your work center together, but there's just a lot going on behind the scenes. So just to point out the other things, these are the links and or the QR codes to any of the feedback that M365 Philly's doing today. So by all means, please provide your feedback. They do listen. We listen to that as well. And the really fun part is there's a raffle today. And if you do this link QR code, M365 Philly NAS at the rebrandly, then you're in for one of these DS220. This is nice. So do take that survey and the sponsors. And then I think the last thing is registering for another giveaway. So they're at the end of the day, they'll be giving away all these things. So great stuff. But that is the end of my presentation. And if anybody has any questions, please put them into the chat.
All right, thanks, Joe. Let's just check the chat now. Nothing. Yeah, okay. I don't know if it even is working. To be honest with you, yeah, it does look like it's working when I posted a comment. Yes. All right. So yeah, be sure to fill out the feedback. This way, it gives us an idea how. Yeah, it says error. Reload the Q&A. Okay.
Yeah.
Be sure to give us feedback on the event. Let us know how we can improve, how we can make it better, what you liked, what you didn't like. We like to hear all those things.
I'll just go ahead and keep that up for a bit. But yeah.
Yeah, and then that's it. So stay tuned. We got in about 15 minutes. We'll be getting set for the next session. So take a break, stretch your legs, take a walk around the block, get some food, drink tea, coffee, whatever it is that you do. So thanks, Joe. You're always welcome
Thanks.
to join us at Philly anytime. Hopefully next year we'll see you in real life.